So when I was 18, growing up in Hawaii, I was scouted to go to Japan, and I released three singles, like records.
Hospital rooms are quiet in a way ballrooms never are. But for Carrie Ann Inaba, that silence carried a terrifying question. After spinal surgery meant to stop the pain, doctors warned that the damage inside her neck and spine was worse than expected. What happens when a lifelong dancer's body stops listening? Fans of Dancing with the Stars suddenly wondered the same. Could the judge who demanded perfect posture even stand tall again? The early rhythm. Imagine the high-voltage energy of a packed television studio, the smell of hairspray, and the deafening roar of a 90s audience. You see a woman who looks invincible, executing a high kick that seems to defy gravity. But if you look closer, past the strobe lights, you'd see the micro-grimaces. You'd see a body that was already beginning to scream. For Carrie Ann Inaba, the tragedy wasn't a sudden crash. It was a slow-motion dismantling of a human spine that started decades before we ever knew her name. Picture a young Carrie Ann, hips swaying in Hawaii's sun, unaware her passion was carving the first cracks in her spine. In 1986, Honolulu wasn't just home. It was a training ground for a war she didn't know she was fighting. At 18, her legs were pumping through jazz routines with a ferocity that left seasoned pros gasping for air. She wasn't just moving, she was punishing the floor. When she joined the Expo All-Stars, her body twisted into shapes that screamed star power. But the receipts of that era show a different story. In her 2025 sit-down with Jennifer Hudson, Carrie Ann finally dropped the mask. She admitted that those early back strains weren't just soreness, they were the blueprint for the disaster to come. The truth is, the mainstream media loves a sudden tragedy, but bodies don't just break at 58. They are dismantled brick by brick in their 20s. By 1990, the stakes got higher. She landed a spot as Fly Girl number 3 on In Living Color. If you grew up in that era, you remember the energy. It was raw, it was athletic, and it was brutal. Behind the scenes, Keenan Ivory Wayans pushed for perfection. We're talking 12-hour rehearsals on hard stages. While the world saw a girl in a crop top making history, Carrie Ann was secretly popping ibuprofen like candy just to survive the afternoon block. To understand the why of her 58-year-old collapse, you have to look at the literal floor she was dancing on in the 90s. The In Living Color stage wasn't the high-tech sprung wood floor you see on modern sets. It was often painted concrete or rigid plywood, surfaces with zero give. Every time Carrie Ann hit a power move choreographed by Rosie Perez, the shockwave didn't stop at her feet. It traveled up her shins, bypassed her knees, and slammed directly into her L4 and L5 vertebrae. Rosie Perez's choreography was revolutionary because it was percussive. It required dancers to hit the beat with violent precision. For Carrie Ann, that meant hundreds of impact landings per week. We're talking about an industrial level of wear and tear that usually only professional NFL players or construction workers face. The Fly Girl era gave her fame, but it also functioned as a hydraulic press for her spinal discs. By the time she reached the DWTS chair, the cushioning in her lower back was already paper-thin. She was essentially a high-performance engine running without oil for 15 years, just waiting for the first gear to strip. There was one specific rehearsal in 1998, a routine flip that went slightly off-axis. She landed, the music kept playing, and she finished the set. But in that moment, pain shot up her lumbar like a lightning strike. The doctors at the time gave her the standard mild herniation label. In the dance world, that's just a Tuesday. But that was her first silent betrayal. It was the moment her spine began whispering warnings that she chose to ignore in favor of the spotlight. But there is a second, more sinister layer to this slow-motion dismantling that the glitzy DWTS promos never mentioned. In 2013, Carrie Ann was handed a diagnosis that changed the math of her survival: Sjogren's syndrome. For those who don't know, Sjogren's is an autoimmune thief. It doesn't just cause dry eyes, it triggers systemic inflammation that turns every minor muscle tear into a permanent scar. While the world saw a judge, Carrie Ann was a walking inflammatory flare. This diagnosis was followed by a battle with lupus, creating a perfect storm inside her joints. Think about it. Her spine was already structurally failing from the 90s, but now her own immune system was actively blocking the repair work. This is why the yoga phase we mentioned earlier backfired so spectacularly. In a healthy body, a deep stretch builds flexibility. In an autoimmune body under fire, a deep stretch can actually trigger a massive inflammatory response that mimics a new injury. The receipts from her 2021 medical records show she wasn't just dealing with back pain. She was experiencing brain fog and extreme fatigue that made remembering the dancers' names a Herculean task. She wasn't just fighting a broken back, she was fighting a body that had forgotten how to stop attacking itself. This hidden war is the real reason her recovery from the 2025 surgery was so statistically unlikely. When your blood is in revolt, the titanium pins in your spine are seen as intruders, not allies. As the 2000s rolled in, the hustle shifted. She transitioned from the floor to the judging chair on Dancing with the Stars in 2005. On camera, she was the lift police, the judge with the sharp eye and the firm grip on the paddle. But the irony was thick enough to choke on. She was critiquing lifts she had once nailed, while her own body was beginning to lock up. Rehearsals for show openers would trigger brutal sciatica. Imagine the scene. The cameras cut to a commercial, the lights dim, and while the audience is cheering, Carrie Ann is being helped out of her chair because her legs have gone numb from sitting too long in heels. She tried to pivot. She built the empire, the books, the wellness brand, and the Carrie Diaries. In the 2000s, she dove into a heavy yoga phase, thinking she could stretch her way out of the damage. But here is the hidden truth the wellness influencers skip. Stretching a spine that is already structurally compromised is like pulling on a frayed rope. Every Zen moment in a hot yoga studio was actually widening the micro tears in her L4 to L5 discs. By 50, the slips on the DWTS set weren't just clumsy accidents. They were her nervous system losing the ability to communicate with her feet. She laughed it off, telling producers, "Gravity's got jokes." But the humor was a shield. The war was already lost. What if she had listened in '86? What if she had rested after that flip in '98? Instead of a 58-year-old facing scalpels and autoimmune flares, she might be dancing today. Those whispers turned into full-blown screams by 2024. But could the blinding lights of the ballroom keep her from seeing the cliff she was about to walk over? DWTS glory masks the pain. The lights dim, the glitter ball trophy sparkles, and the high-energy theme music of Dancing with the Stars kicks in. For millions, it's the ultimate escape. But for the woman sitting in the middle of the judging panel, the show wasn't just a career peak. It was a physical endurance test that was quietly melting her spine. We've all seen her laugh, cheer, and give those iconic 10-point scores, but the receipts from behind the scenes reveal a heartbreaking truth. The very chair she sat in for 33 seasons was slowly becoming her own personal torture device. 2006 DWTS debut. Carrie Ann's critiques cut sharply, but off-camera. Her back buckled under the weight of that judging chair. Season 3 was the moment the world fell in love with her. She sat tall, eyes locked on Emmett Smith's legendary cha-cha, paddle raised high. "Beautiful lines," she beamed, her energy infectious. But what the cameras didn't show was the sheer effort it took just to stand up for a standing ovation. By this point, the 12-hour tapings were compressing her discs at an alarming rate. Her co-judges, Len and Bruno, began to notice a slight limp when the cameras were off. When they asked if she was okay, she'd deflect with a joke, "Too many martinis?" or "Just these heels, guys." But that laughter was a mask for the nerve pinches that were already beginning to travel down her legs. By season 20 in 2015, the pressure reached a breaking point. Carrie Ann was 47, and the years of sitting rigid for celebrity routines had aggravated what doctors were now calling precursors to spinal stenosis. She powered through over 300 episodes, her hands clapping to rhythms that her legs could no longer match. While fans adored her passion, the insiders at ABC saw the ice packs. There is a chilling detail the public missed. Leading up to her 2025 health crisis, Carrie Ann had to adapt how she held her judging paddles. She began using a looser, modified grip to mask a 10% dip in her hand strength, a direct result of nerve compression in her neck. It was a subtle glitch in her performance that served as a blueprint for the 2026 emergency we're seeing today. The pandemic break in 2020 should have been a relief, but the return to the ballroom only amplified the agony. COVID protocols meant even longer stretches of sitting without breaks. During season 29, Carrie Ann finally whispered the truth to producers. Her legs were going completely numb. They adjusted her chair, added cushions, and shortened her walking distance, but she remained fiercely loyal to the ballroom family. Imagine the reality. The show ends, the credits roll, and while the celebrities head to the after-party, Carrie Ann is left alone in the green room, waiting for the pins and needles sensation in her legs to subside so she can simply walk to her car. Was DWTS her great love? Or was it love? The very thing crushing her? By March 2024, the whispers among the crew grew into a roar. Rehearsals left her hobbling, and the high-dose medications she was taking to manage the inflammation began to blur her vision. At 56, she hit a wall of unbearable pain. Fans on social media speculated that her slight weight gain was due to lifestyle changes, but they were dead wrong. It was systemic inflammation and a spine in full revolt. Then came the shockwave. March 4th, 2025. Carrie Ann went on Instagram Live from a hospital bed. "My herniated disc literally exploded," she told her followers, her voice cracking with a vulnerability we'd never seen. Emergency surgery wasn't a choice anymore. It was a survival necessity. Even in the face of a shattered spine, her humor stayed intact. She joked that DWTS prep was easier than these epidurals, but the reality was biting hard. Her nerves were firing incorrectly, and her legs were visibly weakening. The stage hadn't just given her fame, it had stolen her stride. Surgery promised a permanent fix, a way back to the ballroom she loved. The public likes to think the crash happened in 2025, but the real breaking point was actually in April 2021. This was when Carrie Ann took an unexpected leave of absence from her co-hosting gig on The Talk. The mainstream headline said she was focusing on her well-being, but the hidden truth was a total system failure. The physical demand of sitting in a rigid chair for a daily live talk show, not just once a week like DWTS, was the final straw. The silent betrayal had become a loud, screaming reality that forced her to walk away from a multi-million-dollar masterclass contract. The 2021 medical reports indicate she was suffering from severe fibromyalgia flares on top of the spinal stenosis. Imagine the mental toll. You are a professional performer, but you can't even sit through a 60-minute interview without your hands shaking or your vision blurring from the pain. This period was the prelude to the knife. It was during this hiatus that she realized the wellness band-aids, the green juices, and the meditation were no longer enough to hold back the tide. She spent months in dark rooms, away from the Hollywood noise, trying to find a way to reset a nervous system that had been in fight or flight mode since the late 80s. What breaks first? The pride or the physical frame. For Carrie Ann, the two were so intertwined that letting go of the talk felt like a death in the family. It was the first time she had to admit that the invincible fly girl was actually a fragile human being. But as the surgeons prepped the blade for her 57th year, they found a deeper, more systemic betrayal waiting under the surface. The knife's verdict. The operating room lights have a specific kind of glare that stays with you. It is a clinical, unforgiving brightness that promises a new beginning, yet often just illuminates the end of an era. In March 2025, at 57 years old, Carrie Ann Inaba lay on that table while surgeons worked to fuse her L4 and L5 vertebrae. The official word post-op was optimistic. They called it clean margins, and for a fleeting moment, the world thought the ballroom queen was back. Scalpel sliced March 2025. Carrie Ann woke, hoping for dance floors, but she got wheelchair warnings instead. Within days, she was posting those triumphant first steps videos that we all see on Instagram. Fans were flooding the comments with cheers, convinced the nightmare was over. But when the phone screens went dark and the cameras stopped rolling, the fire returned. This wasn't just typical post-surgical soreness. By May 2025, during an appearance on The Jennifer Hudson Show, Carrie Ann dropped the first major hint that the surgery had glitched. She described the sensation of pins in her calves and admitted she couldn't feel her toes most of the time. She tried to laugh it off as being like wearing bad heels, but her body was failing the recovery test. The nerve regeneration was misfiring, and her left leg was starting to drag. By the time Dancing with the Stars, Season 33 rolled around in November, the set had to be completely modified. They installed riser chairs so she wouldn't have to strain her back and removed every unnecessary stair from her path. Bruno and the crew would tease her about her grip on the paddle weakening, and she would quip that the paddle was getting heavy, but the receipts tell a darker story. The truth was that she had already lost 20% of her hand strength due to the creeping onset of spinal stenosis. Imagine your hands literally forgetting their job while the entire world expects you to be a flawless judge of movement. The real devastation hit in January 2026, right around her 58th birthday. She went in for a routine MRI, likely expecting minor news, but the results were a total career cliff. The stenosis had advanced with a vengeance. Her spinal canal was narrowing so rapidly that it was actively crushing the nerves that control her motor skills. A formal grip test confirmed she had now lost 30% of her strength. The hands that once waved perfect tens were now fumbling with forks at dinner. An April 2026 exclusive with Us Weekly laid it all out in a way that the mainstream glitz usually ignores. Doctors were now warning her of a total fusion cascade, a terrifying scenario where every level of her spine begins to collapse one after the other. They told her that if she didn't stop, she was looking at a high risk of permanent paralysis. This kind of betrayal is universal, regardless of the stage you stand on. We see it with veteran athletes and stage performers who keep going long after the music has stopped, fueled by nothing but adrenaline and denial. Carrie Ann's story is a mirror for anyone who has been a loyal ally to their body only to find it has become their greatest foe. In her quiet moments, she reportedly traces the old dance scars, remembering a time when she could fly across a stage without a second thought. Now she spends her time in the dark, texting fans that she is doing good, which we now know is a brave lie designed to keep the brand alive. The humor that once protected her has finally started to fade, because 58 feels like 80 on the bad days. Most competitors in the YouTube space will tell you she's just resting, but the data on her stenosis suggests we are watching a career curtain call. The narrowing of that spinal canal is an architectural failure of the body that no amount of positive thinking can fix. It forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. What if your hands forgot their job? Could you stand there, and judge the stars with shaky palms, knowing that every gesture might be your last. The what and why of her absence from recent events isn't a mystery anymore. It is a mechanical necessity. Her body has officially gone into revolt. The return to the DWTS ballroom tested every single limit she had left, but age 58 brought the final curtain call that no one was ready to see. DWTS return and legacy fade. The stage lights of the season 33 premiere in November 2025 felt different. They were brighter, hotter, and somehow more demanding than they had ever been in the previous 2 decades. For Carrie Ann Inaba, this wasn't just another season opener. It was a desperate attempt to prove that the machined precision of her judging wasn't being dismantled by her own biology. Season 33 lights up. Carrie Ann judges, but every score hides a wince. As she walked out to the thunderous cheers of the live audience, she held her paddle high. But if you zoomed in on the high-definition feed, you could see the visible strain in her forearm muscles. Every second spent standing was a debt she knew she'd have to pay back in the dressing room. During the first few weeks, the energy of the competition seemed to carry her. When Valchmerkovsky performed a high-octane tango, Carrie Ann leaned into the microphone with her signature fire. "Lift her higher," she urged the couple, her voice booming with the authority of a woman who had once been the primary engine of the In Living Color stage. But beneath the table, the reality was grim. The nerves in her thighs were burning like hot wires. Producers had quietly offered to install ramps and even suggested a more ergonomic, specialized chair to alleviate the pressure on her lower back, but Carrie Ann refused. She didn't want the ballroom's pity, she wanted its respect. As soon as the cameras cut to black for the commercial break, her physiotherapist would rush out to adjust the kinesiology tape holding her posture together. As the episodes blurred into December, the physical cost of sitting for 2-hour live broadcasts became a crushing weight. The hidden truth that the mainstream glosses over is that, for a person with advanced spinal stenosis, sitting is often more damaging than standing. It keeps the spine in a state of constant, static compression. One night, mid-critique, the unthinkable happened. As she was delivering a technical breakdown of a quick step, her left leg buckled off camera. She didn't fall, catching herself on the edge of the desk with a practiced grace that only a lifelong performer could manage. She whispered to the late Len Goodman's empty chair, "Just an old war wound." But her eyes told a different story. Fans on social media weren't blind to the changes. The hashtag Pray for Carrie Ann began to trend as viewers noticed her movements becoming increasingly stiff. At 58, the stenosis was stealing more than just her mobility. It was stealing her spontaneity. The sharp, off-the-cuff wit that made her a fan favorite was being replaced by pre-written notes. Why? Because the pain levels were so high. They were beginning to cause minor speech slurs, a common side effect of extreme neurological stress. The receipts of her career were being rewritten in real time. The grip loss we discussed earlier peaked mid-season during a particularly emotional elimination. As she went to raise her paddle, it slipped from her hand, clattering onto the floor. She blamed it on sweat and a humid studio, but the crew knew. The 30% strength loss was now undeniable. This moment was a tragic echo of her 1980s flips. The same L-spine that had powered her rise to fame was now the very thing causing her to fumble the tools of her trade. Her legacy is massive. She shaped the careers of stars like Jordan Fisher and defined what it meant to be a technical judge in a reality TV world. But now, the whispers in the ABC hallways are about benching her for her own safety. "My body finally betrayed the ballroom," she reportedly told her inner circle. Even as the curtains began to close on her physical ability to judge, her humor lingered like a ghost of her younger self. "If I can survive being a fly girl under the Wayans brothers, I can survive this," she'd tell the makeup artists. But the tears came in private, usually in the back of the car on the way home when the adrenaline finally wore off. Her story is a stark warning for the grinders of the world, the people who trade their long-term health for short-term glory. It reminds us that the hustle has a high price, and eventually, the bill comes due. When we look at her empty chair or watch those old clips of her defying gravity in Honolulu, we have to ask the hard questions. Would you trade your fame for feet that actually work? If you had to choose between the paddle and your peace, which one would win? The tragedy of Carrie Ann Inaba isn't just that she's in pain. It's that she spent her entire life building a world that she can now only watch from the sidelines. Beyond the ballroom lights, what is her final fight forward? And what is the one lesson we are all missing? Resilience and the road ahead. The ballroom floor is now quiet. The glitter has been swept away, and the heavy studio doors have closed. For the first time in over 20 years, Carrie Ann Inaba isn't preparing for a new season of critiques or marking a dance floor with her signature energy. She is standing, carefully, deliberately, in the middle of her own living room, facing a reality that no television filter can soften. Lights dim, Carrie Ann faces 58's truth, adapt, or fade. This is the chapter the cameras don't usually capture. The quiet, grueling aftermath of a life lived at 110%, where the receipts of every high kick and televised jump are finally being cashed in. As we move through 2026, the pivot is no longer a choice. It is a survival strategy. Carrie Ann has traded the judging paddle for the podcast microphone and the wellness manuscript. She's diving deep into the world of chronic pain advocacy. But this isn't just a brand pivot for likes. It is a necessity. Her days are now measured in physical therapy sessions and grip therapy. She's working with specialized weights, trying to rebuild the neural pathways that decades of dance and months of spinal compression tried to erase. On Instagram, she remains the eternal optimist, posting that stenosis taught me gratitude. But when the sun goes down and the chronic inflammation flares up, the fear of the wheelchair remains a very real, very silent guest in her home. The what and why of this tragedy finally comes full circle here. We can trace a direct line from those 1986 Hawaii jazz rehearsals where she ignored the first sharp twinges in her lower back to the surgical theater of 2025. It's a snowball effect that took 40 years to reach the bottom of the mountain. The hidden truth is that her body didn't suddenly break at 58. It finally stopped being able to lie for her. In a move that feels like a full-circle redemption, Carrie Ann has started mentoring the next generation of performers. Her message is blunt, stripped of the usual Hollywood fluff. Rest before the betrayal starts. She's seen it all. The young dancers in high-stakes studios pushing through stress fractures and nerve pain for a shot at a national tour or a viral moment. It's a universal hustle. Whether you're a performer in a New York theater or an artist in a high-pressure creative hub, the temptation to ignore the early twinge is the same. Carrie Ann's hands, the very ones that used to wave perfect tens to millions, are now typing out wellness tips and warning signs for those who are still young enough to change their trajectory. She jokes about it with her signature wit, "I went from giving out perfect tens to managing imperfect grips." Looking toward the future, the mainstream version of Carrie Ann Inaba might involve occasional guest spots or a seat at the producer's table. But the era of the full-time judging marathon is likely over. The odds of dodging permanent paralysis via a series of fusion cascades sit at a precarious 50-50. It's a coin flip that most of us couldn't live with, yet she carries it with a grace that is arguably more impressive than any routine she ever performed. Her legacy is secured. She changed how dance was perceived on television, but the tragedy remains. It is the story of a body's mutiny after 40 years of loyal, record-breaking service. What if she had listened back in Honolulu? What if we all heeded those early warnings our bodies send us before they turn into screams? We live in a culture that rewards the grind and celebrates those who power through. But Carrie Ann is the living receipt of what happens when you win the war but lose the temple. Have you spotted your own betrayal signs yet? Her story remains an open book, a narrative of a woman refusing to let a broken spine define a whole life. She's navigating the road ahead with the same rhythm she used on the stage, just a little slower and with a lot more intention. Carrie Ann Inaba's journey from the sunny shores of Hawaii to the most famous judging panel in the world is a masterclass in the human spirit, and a cautionary tale about the cost of greatness. The hidden level of reality here is that the stars we admire are often fighting wars we can't see behind the sequins. If this deep dive into the truth behind the ballroom lights changed how you see the price of fame, make sure to share this with someone who needs to hear it.